My name is Paige Davis. I'm 30 years old, and I just discovered that my family forged my signature to mortgage my completely paid off $1.1 million house without my knowledge, using the $800,000 loan to fund my brother Tyler's failed restaurant venture that collapsed within 6 months, while leaving me responsible for massive monthly payments I never agreed to make. What my family didn't know was that their elaborate mortgage fraud scheme was about to trigger the most comprehensive federal real estate fraud investigation in our county's history, one that would cost them their freedom while restoring the financial security they had so callously stolen from the home I had worked 8 years to own outright. The phone call that shattered my world came on a Tuesday morning in October, while I was reviewing property listings for my real estate clients, completely unaware that my own home, the foundation of my financial security, and the greatest accomplishment of my adult life, was about to become the center of a family betrayal so profound that it would destroy not just my trust in the people I loved, but also the financial independence I had sacrificed everything to achieve. Ms. Davis, this is Jennifer Rodriguez from First National Mortgage calling about your seriously delinquent account, the voice on the phone announced with the professional concern reserved for borrowers who were facing foreclosure proceedings. You're currently 3 months behind on payments for your $800,000 mortgage, and we need to discuss immediate payment arrangements to avoid foreclosure action on your property at 847 Maple Lane. The words created a confusion so complete that I initially thought the mortgage company had made a clerical error or confused my property with someone else's account. I had paid off my house completely 2 years earlier after 8 years of aggressive payments, overtime work, and personal sacrifices that had eliminated every penny of debt on the property I considered my greatest achievement and source of financial security. I think there's been a mistake, I replied, pulling up my own records to verify what I already knew to be true. My house at 847 Maple Lane is completely paid off. I don't have a mortgage with your company or anyone else. The property has been debt-free since I made my final payment in June of 2022. The pause that followed was long enough to make me nervous, and when Jennifer responded, her tone had shifted from routine collection concern to something much more serious and confusing. Ms. Davis, I'm looking at mortgage documents dated March 15, 2024, showing an $800,000 loan secured by your property. The application includes your signature, employment verification, and financial documentation that was approved through our standard underwriting process. The mention of March 2024 sent a chill through me because I had definitely not applied for any mortgage or loan during that time period. I had been focused entirely on growing my real estate business and enjoying the financial freedom that came with owning my home outright, free from monthly mortgage payments that had constrained my budget for nearly a decade. That's impossible, I said, my voice rising with panic as the implications of what she was telling me began to sink in. I never applied for a mortgage in March or any other time since paying off my house. Someone must have used my information fraudulently, or there's been some kind of identity theft. Ms. Davis, mortgage fraud is a serious federal crime that we investigate thoroughly, Jennifer replied, her professional training clearly kicking in as she recognized the potential legal implications of the situation. If you're claiming that this $800,000 mortgage was obtained without your knowledge or consent, we'll need to begin fraud investigation procedures immediately. This could involve law enforcement and federal agencies that handle real estate fraud. The word fraud hit me like a physical blow because it meant that someone had deliberately used my identity and property to obtain hundreds of thousands of dollars without my knowledge, creating debt obligations that could destroy the financial security I had worked so hard to achieve. But worse than the financial implications was the growing realization that whoever had done this had intimate knowledge of my property, my income, and my personal information. I want to see all the documents related to this supposed mortgage, I demanded, trying to maintain professional composure while my mind raced through the implications of what was happening. I need copies of the application, the signature documents, and any other paperwork that was used to approve this loan that I definitely never applied for. Jennifer agreed to expedite document production, while also initiating the bank's fraud investigation procedures. But she also explained that until the fraud investigation was completed, I remained legally responsible for the mortgage payments, regardless of whether I had actually applied for the loan. "The mortgage is currently secured by your property," she explained, "which means that regardless of how the loan was obtained, the bank has legal claim against your house until this situation is resolved. We'll work with you during the fraud investigation, but you need to understand that foreclosure proceedings will continue unless payments are made or fraud is definitively proven." The threat of foreclosure on a house I owned outright was so surreal that I struggled to process what was happening. Someone had stolen my financial security by fraudulently mortgaging my paid-off property, and now I faced the possibility of losing my home unless I could prove crimes that I didn't yet understand. After ending the call with the mortgage company, I immediately drove to my parents' house to discuss what had to be some kind of identity theft or fraud scheme targeting our family. Robert and Linda Davis had always been involved in my major financial decisions, and I assumed they would be as shocked and concerned as I was about someone fraudulently mortgaging my property. But as I pulled into their driveway and walked toward the front door where I had shared news of paying off my mortgage 2 years earlier, I had no idea that I was about to discover the most devastating family betrayal imaginable. One that would reveal that the people I trusted most in the world had been the ones who stole my financial independence while expecting me to be grateful for their criminal destruction of my security. The expression on my father's face when I explained the mortgage company's call told me everything I needed to know before he said a single word. Instead of the shock and concern I expected from a parent learning that their child was the victim of mortgage fraud, Robert Davis looked guilty, defensive, and prepared for a confrontation he had clearly been expecting. "Dad, someone forged my signature to get an $800,000 mortgage on my house," I began, watching his reaction carefully as I tried to understand why he didn't seem surprised by this devastating news. "The mortgage company says I'm 3 months behind on payments for a loan I never applied for. We need to call the police and report this fraud immediately." "Sit down, Paige," my father said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used when delivering family decisions that he expected me to accept without argument. "Your mother and I need to explain some family financial arrangements that we made to help Tyler get his restaurant business started." The phrase family financial arrangements sent ice through my veins because it suggested that my parents had some knowledge of or involvement in the mortgage that had been taken out against my property without my consent. The guilty look on both their faces made it clear that this wasn't identity theft by strangers. This was family betrayal of the most profound kind. "What family financial arrangements?" I asked, though I was already beginning to understand that my parents had somehow been involved in mortgaging my house without my knowledge or permission. "Dad, what does Tyler's restaurant have to do with a fraudulent mortgage on my property?" My mother, Linda, joined the conversation with justifications that revealed how completely they had convinced themselves that stealing my financial security was actually beneficial for everyone involved. "Paige, Tyler's restaurant needed significant startup capital, and banks weren't willing to lend to him because of his previous business challenges," she began, apparently believing that Tyler's history of failed ventures somehow justified committing fraud against my property. "We knew you'd say no and be selfish about helping Tyler achieve his dreams," Robert continued, his tone becoming more defensive as he realized I wasn't going to be grateful for their criminal assistance. "So we handled the financing ourselves using your house as collateral. Tyler's restaurant is going to be incredibly successful, and you have stable income from your real estate work to handle the monthly payments. Have you ever had family members admit to committing federal crimes against you while expecting you to be grateful for their criminal betrayal? That's exactly what I experienced as my parents explained that they had forged my signature and fraudulently mortgaged my paid-off house to fund Tyler's latest business venture." "You forged my signature?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper as the magnitude of their betrayal began to sink in. "You took out an $800,000 mortgage on my house without my knowledge or consent. Do you understand that's mortgage fraud and forgery? Those are federal crimes that carry prison sentences." "We didn't forge anything," Linda said defensively, clearly uncomfortable with the accurate legal description of what they had done. "We used power of attorney documents that give us the right to make financial decisions on your behalf when necessary. Tyler needed this opportunity, and we knew you would never agree to help him voluntarily." The mention of power of attorney documents was even more alarming because I had never granted my parents any legal authority to make financial decisions about my property. Either they were lying about having such documents, or they had forged those as well, adding another layer of fraud to their criminal scheme. "What power of attorney documents?" I demanded, knowing that I had never signed anything giving my parents authority over my property or finances. "I never granted you power of attorney for anything, especially not for mortgaging my house." The uncomfortable silence that followed made it clear that my parents had either forged power of attorney documents in addition to forging my mortgage application, or they were lying about having any legal authority to act on my behalf. Either way, they had committed multiple federal crimes while expecting me to accept the financial consequences without complaint. "The important thing is that Tyler's restaurant is going to be incredibly successful," Robert said, clearly trying to change the subject from the legal mechanisms of their fraud to the supposed benefits of their actions. "He's invested everything in creating an upscale steakhouse that will attract wealthy customers and generate substantial profits. The mortgage payments will be easily affordable once the restaurant starts generating revenue." The casual assumption that Tyler's restaurant would succeed despite his history of business failures, and that I would be responsible for mortgage payments I never agreed to make, revealed how completely my parents had prioritized Tyler's dreams over my financial security and legal rights. "Dad, Tyler has started and failed at 5 different businesses in the past 7 years," I pointed out, trying to help him understand the insanity of betting my house on another of Tyler's entrepreneurial fantasies. "He's never successfully operated any business for more than 18 months. Why would you risk my home on someone with that track record? Tyler has learned from his previous experiences. And this restaurant concept is different," Linda replied, using the same optimistic tone she had employed to justify supporting Tyler's previous failed ventures. "He's hired professional consultants and invested in high-quality equipment that will ensure success this time." The conversation continued for over 2 hours, with my parents becoming increasingly defensive about their mortgage fraud, while showing no understanding of the legal jeopardy they had created for themselves or the financial devastation they had caused me. They were treating federal crimes as family financial planning and expecting me to be grateful for their criminal destruction of my security. When I finally demanded to see the mortgage documents and power of attorney paperwork they claimed justified their actions, their response revealed the full scope of their deception and the extent of the legal violations they had committed to fund Tyler's restaurant dreams. "We'll get you copies of everything," Robert said evasively. "But you need to understand that this arrangement benefits everyone. Tyler gets his chance at success, you help family when they need it, and we all share in the profits when the restaurant becomes successful." The promise to provide documentation was clearly a delaying tactic, and their continued refusal to acknowledge the criminal nature of their actions made it obvious that they had no remorse for their fraud and no intention of taking responsibility for the massive debt they had created in my name. As I drove home that evening to the house that was no longer truly mine, I realized that my parents had not only committed serious federal crimes against me, but had also fundamentally changed our family relationships forever. The trust that had allowed them access to my personal information and confidence in my financial success had been used to destroy the very security they had helped me celebrate. But I also realized that their casual dismissal of mortgage fraud and forgery was about to become a very expensive education in federal law enforcement and the serious consequences of stealing someone's home equity to fund failed business ventures. The true scope of my family's betrayal became devastatingly clear over the following weeks as I investigated the mortgage fraud that had destroyed my financial security and discovered that Tyler's restaurant venture had been not only doomed from the start, but had also been funded through criminal means that made every family member complicit in federal fraud. My examination of the mortgage documents obtained from First National Mortgage revealed a sophisticated fraud scheme that went far beyond simple signature forgery to include fabricated financial statements, false employment verification, and an elaborate network of lies designed to convince lenders that I had applied for and qualified for an $800,000 loan against my paid-off property. The forged signature on the mortgage application was obviously not mine, but it was skillful enough to pass initial verification by bank employees who weren't handwriting experts. More concerning was the fake power of attorney document that my parents had created to give themselves legal authority to act on my behalf, complete with falsified notary stamps and witness signatures that made their document fraud a federal crime carrying additional penalties. "This is one of the most comprehensive mortgage fraud schemes we've investigated," explained Detective Sarah Martinez from the county's financial crimes unit when I reported the forgery and identity theft. Your family didn't just forge your signature. They created an entire fraudulent identity package designed to convince multiple institutions that you were voluntarily taking out this loan. The financial statements submitted with my mortgage application showed income and assets that were dramatically inflated beyond my actual real estate earnings, apparently designed to ensure loan approval despite the large amount being borrowed. These false financial documents constituted additional federal crimes that would increase my family's legal jeopardy significantly. But perhaps the most infuriating aspect of the fraud was that all the loan proceeds had been transferred directly to Tyler's business accounts, meaning that I had received no benefit whatsoever from the debt that was now threatening my home with foreclosure. I was facing the loss of my house to pay for Tyler's business equipment and startup costs without having any ownership stake in his restaurant venture. Tyler's restaurant, Prime Cut Steakhouse, had opened with great fanfare 4 months after the fraudulent mortgage was obtained, featuring expensive equipment, luxury furnishings, and an elaborate marketing campaign that clearly consumed enormous amounts of the money stolen from my home equity. Social media posts from the opening celebration showed Tyler posing with professional-grade kitchen equipment, custom dining room furniture, and imported wine collections that had been purchased with funds fraudulently borrowed against my property. Grand opening of Prime Cut Steakhouse. Tyler had posted with photos of himself surrounded by expensive restaurant equipment and elegant dining room decor. Years of planning and dreaming have finally come together in this incredible culinary experience. Thank you to everyone who supported this vision and made it possible. Prime Cut Steakhouse. Dreams. Come true, Ja family support. New business, Ja grand opening. The casual reference to family support, while posing with equipment purchased using funds stolen through mortgage fraud against my house, was both infuriating and legally significant, because it documented Tyler's knowledge that family money rather than his own resources had funded his business venture. But Tyler's restaurant dream quickly became a nightmare that validated every concern I had raised about his business judgment and management abilities. Within 2 months of opening, Prime Cut Steakhouse was struggling with poor customer reviews, staff turnover, food quality problems, and financial management issues that were consuming the stolen mortgage money at an alarming rate. Online reviews of Tyler's restaurant painted a picture of expensive food with inconsistent quality, unprofessional service, and operational problems that suggested fundamental mismanagement of the business, despite the substantial startup funding that had been stolen from my home equity. Overpriced steakhouse with mediocre food and terrible service, read a typical review on social media. The restaurant has beautiful equipment and elegant decor, but the food is badly prepared and the staff seems untrained. For these prices, the quality should be much higher. Will not return. The pattern of negative reviews continued throughout Tyler's brief operation of the restaurant, with customers consistently noting the disconnect between the expensive equipment and furnishings and the poor quality of food and service being provided. It became clear that Tyler had focused on purchasing impressive equipment rather than developing the culinary and management skills necessary for restaurant success. By month 4, Tyler was behind on rent, supplier payments, and employee wages, despite having access to $800,000 in startup capital that had been stolen from my property. The financial mismanagement was so severe that creditors were beginning legal action against the business, while Tyler desperately sought additional funding to keep the restaurant operating. Need emergency investors for Prime Cut Steakhouse, Tyler posted on his social media, apparently hoping to find additional victims for his failed business model. Temporary cash flow challenges due to market conditions, but the restaurant concept is solid and profitable long-term. Looking for partners who understand the hospitality industry and believe in this vision. The attempt to recruit additional investors while his business was failing spectacularly demonstrated Tyler's continued delusion about his entrepreneurial abilities and his willingness to deceive potential partners about the true financial condition of his restaurant. 6 months after opening with stolen startup capital, Prime Cut Steakhouse closed permanently, having burned through the entire $800,000 mortgage taken out against my house, while generating negligible revenue and leaving me responsible for monthly payments on debt that had funded nothing but Tyler's expensive business failure. The restaurant closure was announced with typical Tyler optimism that revealed his complete disconnection from reality and his inability to take responsibility for the massive financial failure that had consumed my home equity. Prime Cut Steakhouse is temporarily closing to restructure and develop new concepts that will better serve our community, Tyler posted, apparently unable to admit that his restaurant had simply failed due to poor management and unrealistic business planning. Thank you to everyone who supported us during this initial phase. We look forward to returning with an even better dining experience soon. But while Tyler was planning his next business venture, I was receiving foreclosure notices from the mortgage company and facing the prospect of losing my home to pay for equipment and furnishings that Tyler was now claiming as his personal assets for use in future business ventures. The casual way Tyler treated the expensive restaurant equipment as his personal property, despite it being purchased with funds stolen through fraud against my house, revealed the depth of entitlement and selfishness that had driven my family's criminal scheme from the beginning. Have you ever watched someone treat the proceeds of crimes against you as their personal assets while you faced foreclosure on property they had fraudulently mortgaged? That's exactly what I experienced as Tyler began planning his next business venture, using equipment purchased with money stolen from my home. The equipment and furnishings that had consumed my stolen home equity were about to become evidence in a federal prosecution that would teach my entire family about the serious consequences of mortgage fraud and real estate crime. The aftermath of Tyler's restaurant failure revealed the true callousness and entitlement of my family, as they not only expected me to accept responsibility for the $800,000 mortgage debt created through their fraud, but also supported Tyler's decision to keep the expensive equipment and furnishings as his personal assets for use in future business ventures, showing complete disregard for the financial devastation they had caused me. My parents' reaction to Tyler's business failure was not remorse for the mortgage fraud that had funded his failed venture, but rather irritation that I was being dramatic about helping family, instead of quietly accepting the monthly mortgage payments that would preserve my house while Tyler planned his next entrepreneurial adventure, using the equipment purchased with my stolen home equity. Paige, you're being unreasonable about this situation, my mother Linda said when I called to demand that Tyler sell his restaurant equipment to help pay down the fraudulent mortgage. Tyler invested everything in that restaurant, and he deserves to keep the assets he purchased so he can try again with a better business model. You have a good job and can afford the mortgage payments. The suggestion that Tyler deserved to keep equipment purchased with funds stolen from my house while I struggled with unwanted debt was so morally backwards that I initially couldn't respond. They were treating Tyler as the victim of business failure, rather than acknowledging that he was the beneficiary of criminal fraud against my property. Mom, that equipment was purchased with money stolen through mortgage fraud against my house, I explained, trying once again to help them understand the legal and moral reality of their actions. I never consented to that mortgage, and I never agreed to fund Tyler's restaurant. The equipment should be sold to pay down the debt you created in my name. We didn't steal anything, Robert interjected, clearly frustrated by my continued objection to their criminal scheme. We made a family investment in Tyler's business using your house as collateral. Family members should support each other, and you're being selfish by refusing to help Tyler recover from this temporary setback. The characterization of mortgage fraud as family investment, and my objection to financial crimes as selfishness, revealed how completely my parents had convinced themselves that their actions were justified and that I was being unreasonable by demanding accountability for their betrayal. But their attitude became even more callous when Tyler announced his plans to use the restaurant equipment he was keeping as assets for his next business venture, a casual dining concept that would supposedly succeed where his upscale steakhouse had failed spectacularly. I've learned so much from the Prime Cut experience, Tyler explained during a family meeting, where he outlined his plans to launch another restaurant using equipment purchased with my stolen home equity. The upscale market was more challenging than expected, but casual dining has much better profit margins and broader customer appeal. I already have investors interested in this new concept. Or, the complete absence of accountability for the business failure that had consumed $800,000 of fraudulently obtained funds was breathtaking, but Tyler's continued entrepreneurial optimism, despite his consistent record of failure, revealed the delusional thinking that had led my parents to risk my house on his latest venture. What about the mortgage on Paige's house? I asked, hoping that someone in my family would acknowledge the debt crisis they had created through their fraud. That $800,000 loan is still outstanding, and I'm receiving foreclosure notices because payments haven't been made. You'll figure out the mortgage situation, Tyler replied dismissively, apparently viewing the debt he had created through fraud as my problem rather than his responsibility. You have stable income and good credit, so you can work with the bank to restructure the payments. I need to focus on getting my new restaurant concept launched while market conditions are favorable. The casual assumption that I would handle the financial consequences of their fraud, while Tyler pursued another doomed business venture using assets purchased with my stolen home equity, was so selfish that even my parents seemed uncomfortable with his response. But instead of holding Tyler accountable for the debt he had created or demanding that he liquidate his assets to pay restitution, my parents continued to support his plans while pressuring me to accept the mortgage payments as a reasonable family obligation. Paige, you need to work with the mortgage company to get your payments current and avoid foreclosure, Linda said, treating the fraudulent debt as if it were my legitimate responsibility. Tyler can't be expected to solve your financial problems when he's trying to rebuild his business after this temporary setback. The complete inversion of responsibility, treating me as the person who needed to solve financial problems created by their criminal fraud, was so morally twisted that I began to understand that my family was incapable of acknowledging the wrongness of their actions or taking appropriate accountability for their crimes. Extended family members who learned about the situation were influenced by my parents' narrative that I was being unreasonable about helping family, apparently unaware that the help being requested involved accepting responsibility for federal crimes committed against my property without my knowledge or consent. Your parents mentioned you're having some disagreements about family financial support, my Aunt Sarah said during a phone call clearly prompted by my parents' damage control efforts. Families should stick together during difficult times, and I hope you can work out whatever issues you're having with Tyler's business situation. The euphemistic language used to describe mortgage fraud as family financial support, and my objection to crimes as disagreements revealed how effectively my parents were spinning the situation to avoid accountability, while maintaining their image as reasonable people trying to help their children succeed. But while my family continued to minimize the seriousness of their fraud and expect me to accept the consequences of their crimes, I was working with federal investigators and real estate attorneys who understood both the criminal nature of what had been done to me and the comprehensive legal remedies available to victims of mortgage fraud and forgery. The documentation I was gathering included not only evidence of the forged signatures and fraudulent loan documents, but also recorded conversations where my family members admitted to obtaining the mortgage without my knowledge, and Tyler's acknowledgement that he understood family money rather than legitimate lending had funded his failed restaurant. I never could have gotten this kind of funding through normal bank loans, Tyler had said during one recorded family conversation, apparently unaware that his admission was being documented for legal purposes. My credit and business history would never qualify for $800,000 in startup capital. I'm grateful that we found a way to make this opportunity possible. The recorded admission that Tyler knew his restaurant funding had come through irregular means rather than legitimate lending would be crucial evidence in proving conspiracy and criminal intent in the federal prosecution that was being prepared against my entire family. While Tyler planned his next business venture using equipment purchased with funds stolen from my house, and my parents expected me to quietly accept mortgage debt created through their fraud, federal investigators were building a comprehensive case that would soon teach all of them about the serious consequences of real estate fraud and the protections that exist for property owners victimized by family members who commit crimes against their homes. Have you ever watched family members plan future crimes using the proceeds of previous crimes while expecting you to accept responsibility for their criminal behavior? That's exactly what I experienced as my family treated mortgage fraud as a reasonable business strategy while I prepared legal action that would restore justice to my stolen home equity. The federal investigation that would ultimately deliver comprehensive justice for my family's mortgage fraud was advancing rapidly as I worked with specialized attorneys and federal agents who understood both the criminal nature of real estate fraud and the sophisticated legal remedies available to homeowners whose properties had been illegally encumbered through forgery and identity theft schemes. My consultation with attorney Michael Thompson, a partner at Thompson & Associates who specialized in mortgage fraud recovery and real estate crime, revealed that my family's actions constituted multiple federal violations that were prosecuted aggressively by the Department of Justice because of their impact on banking security and homeowners' rights. Ms. Davis, what your family did represents a textbook case of mortgage fraud, forgery, and conspiracy that federal prosecutors pursue vigorously, Attorney Thompson explained during our comprehensive case evaluation meeting. The forged signatures, false financial documents, and fraudulent power of attorney create multiple felony charges, carrying potential sentences of 15 to 25 years in federal prison. The legal framework protecting homeowners from exactly the kind of fraud my family had committed was comprehensive and designed to ensure that property owners couldn't lose their homes to criminal schemes involving forged documents and identity theft, regardless of whether the criminals were family members or strangers. Working with Attorney Thompson, I also met with Special Agent Patricia Williams from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, who explained that mortgage fraud cases involving family members often revealed patterns of financial abuse and criminal thinking that justified aggressive prosecution to protect other potential victims. Family mortgage fraud cases are particularly serious because they involve breaches of trust that make victims vulnerable to additional crimes, Agent Williams explained during our initial interview. Your family's willingness to commit federal crimes against your property suggests they may have committed similar offenses against other family members, or may escalate their criminal activity if not prosecuted comprehensively. The federal investigation revealed that my parents had indeed committed additional financial crimes beyond the mortgage fraud against my house, including credit card fraud using my personal information and unauthorized access to financial accounts that I had established for business purposes. These additional crimes would support enhanced charges and penalties that would ensure comprehensive accountability for their systematic financial abuse. But the most damaging evidence against my family came from their own statements and actions after Tyler's restaurant failure, which demonstrated ongoing criminal intent and complete lack of remorse for the fraud they had committed against my property. Recorded phone conversations between my parents and Tyler revealed their continued planning to use the equipment purchased with my stolen home equity for future business ventures, while expecting me to pay the mortgage debt they had created through fraud. We need to make sure Paige handles the mortgage payments so Tyler can focus on getting his next restaurant launched, Linda had said during one recorded conversation, apparently believing that their criminal fraud had created legitimate financial obligations that I should accept without complaint. The equipment Tyler bought is worth at least $200,000, and it's perfect for the new casual dining concept, Robert had responded, treating assets purchased with funds stolen from my house as Tyler's legitimate business property, rather than proceeds of criminal fraud. But the most incriminating evidence came from Tyler himself, who had admitted in recorded conversations that he knew the mortgage funding had been obtained without my knowledge or consent, making him a knowing participant in the fraud scheme, rather than an innocent recipient of family financial assistance. I knew Paige would never agree to mortgage her house for my restaurant, Tyler had said during a family planning meeting that I had recorded. But sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve success, and this opportunity was too good to pass up just because she might not understand the long-term benefits. The recorded admission that Tyler knew the mortgage had been obtained against my will while he characterized fraud as calculated risk would be devastating evidence in the federal prosecution that would soon transform his business planning into criminal defense strategy. The comprehensive evidence I was gathering also included financial records showing the systematic conversion of my stolen home equity into personal assets that Tyler was now treating as his private property for use in future criminal enterprises disguised as legitimate business ventures. Bank records revealed that Tyler had used restaurant funds to purchase personal items, including luxury appliances for his home, expensive vehicles, and travel expenses that had nothing to do with restaurant operations, but had been funded entirely through the mortgage fraud committed against my property. Your brother used mortgage proceeds for personal purchases that constituted money laundering and fraudulent conversion of stolen property, Agent Williams explained as we reviewed Tyler's spending patterns. These additional crimes will support enhanced federal charges that could result in sentences of 25 to 30 years in prison. But the federal investigation was also revealing the broader pattern of financial abuse that had made my family's crimes possible, including years of manipulative behavior designed to gain access to my personal information and financial accounts that had eventually enabled their sophisticated fraud scheme. Financial surveillance of my parents' communications revealed their systematic collection of my personal information over several years, including social security numbers, employment records, bank account information, and property documents that had been gathered under the pretense of helping me with financial planning and tax preparation. Your parents conducted what amounts to financial intelligence gathering over multiple years to prepare for this fraud scheme, Agent Williams continued. They weren't opportunistic criminals. They were systematic financial predators who planned and executed sophisticated crimes against your property rights. The revelation that my parents' helpfulness with my finances had actually been preparation for criminal fraud added another dimension of betrayal to their actions, while also supporting federal charges related to conspiracy and premeditated financial crime that would increase their potential sentences significantly. Working with federal investigators, I was also documenting the ongoing nature of my family's criminal enterprise, including Tyler's plans to use proceeds of the mortgage fraud to launch additional business ventures that would likely fail while consuming more of my stolen home equity. We have evidence that Tyler is planning to use restaurant equipment purchased with stolen mortgage funds as collateral for additional loans, Agent Williams revealed during one of our investigative meetings. He's essentially planning to commit additional fraud using the proceeds of his original crimes against your property. The evidence of ongoing criminal activity would justify immediate arrests and asset seizure that would prevent Tyler from using my stolen home equity to fund additional failed business ventures, while ensuring that the equipment purchased with fraudulent funds would be available for restitution rather than supporting continued criminal activity. The timing of the federal arrests had been carefully coordinated to occur during Tyler's business planning meeting for his next restaurant venture, where he would be surrounded by evidence of his criminal use of my stolen home equity while demonstrating his continued commitment to fraudulent business practices. We want to execute the arrests when your family is actively planning additional crimes using the proceeds of their original fraud, Agent Williams explained as we finalized the timing. This sends a clear message about the seriousness of mortgage fraud, while preventing them from committing additional crimes against your property or other potential victims. Have you ever prepared federal legal action so comprehensive that it would not only recover your stolen property, but also prevent ongoing criminal activity by family members who viewed fraud as a legitimate business strategy? That's exactly what I was doing as federal agents prepared arrest warrants that would soon transform my family's business planning meeting into their introduction to federal criminal law and its consequences. The restaurant planning session that Tyler had organized to discuss his next business venture using equipment purchased with my stolen home equity was about to become the scene of federal arrests that would deliver comprehensive justice for mortgage fraud while protecting my property from additional criminal schemes. The federal arrests that took place during Tyler's business planning meeting for his next restaurant venture unfolded with a precision and dramatic impact that permanently transformed my family's understanding of the criminal nature of their actions while delivering comprehensive justice for the mortgage fraud that had threatened my home and financial security. Tyler's planning meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at a local business center, where he had rented a conference room to present his casual dining concept to potential investors who were unaware that his startup assets had been obtained through federal crimes against my property. The meeting was intended to secure additional funding for another restaurant venture using equipment purchased with my stolen home equity as proof of his business credibility. I had learned about the meeting through recorded phone conversations, where Tyler discussed his strategy for convincing investors that his restaurant failure had been due to market conditions rather than fundamental management problems, while positioning himself as an experienced operator with valuable assets and industry knowledge. This casual dining concept is going to be much more successful than the upscale steakhouse, Tyler had said during one recorded call with potential investors. I have all the equipment and experience from my previous restaurant, so startup costs will be minimal, and profit margins will be excellent from day one. The misrepresentation of equipment purchased with funds stolen from my house as his legitimate business assets, combined with his failure to disclose that his previous restaurant had failed after consuming $800,000 in fraudulently obtained startup capital, constituted additional fraud that would support enhanced federal charges against his criminal enterprise. At 2:30 p.m., just as Tyler was beginning his presentation about his proven restaurant expertise and valuable startup assets to 12 potential investors, 6 federal agents and 4 local police officers entered the conference room with arrest warrants and search warrants for all 3 family members involved in the mortgage fraud conspiracy. Special Agent Patricia Williams led the federal team, displaying her FBI credentials as she approached the conference table, where Tyler was showing photographs of restaurant equipment purchased with my stolen home equity, while misrepresenting it as evidence of his business success and financial credibility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Agent Williams announced to the shocked investors and business consultants, "I'm Special Agent Williams with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have federal arrest warrants for Tyler Davis, Robert Davis, and Linda Davis in connection with mortgage fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and theft of property valued at over $800,000. The formal announcement of federal charges caused immediate confusion and panic among the potential investors, who were suddenly realizing that they had been considering partnership with someone involved in serious federal crimes, and that the business assets being presented as proof of credibility were actually proceeds of mortgage fraud. Tyler's response to being handcuffed was predictable, based on his character throughout the crisis. He immediately tried to blame others for his legal problems, while denying any understanding of why using fraudulently obtained funds to purchase restaurant equipment might constitute federal crimes. "This is insane!" Tyler shouted as federal agents secured him in custody. "I used family money to start a legitimate restaurant business. How can anyone call that criminal? My parents supported my entrepreneurial dreams, and now the government is trying to destroy my success." "Mr. Davis," Agent Williams replied in her professional law enforcement tone, "family money obtained through mortgage fraud against your sister's property constitutes the proceeds of federal crimes. Your use of $800,000 in stolen funds to purchase restaurant equipment makes you a participant in conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, money laundering, and theft of federally insured mortgage funds." The professional correction of Tyler's attempts to characterize federal crimes as family financial assistance provided clear education for the potential investors about the actual legal status of what they had been considering supporting financially. My parents were arrested simultaneously as they arrived at the business center to support Tyler's presentation to potential investors, apparently planning to provide character references and financial backing for his next restaurant venture, using additional proceeds from the mortgage fraud they had committed against my property. "Robert Davis and Linda Davis," another federal agent announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, forgery of financial documents, identity theft, and theft of federally insured mortgage funds. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The reading of federal charges that included identity theft and theft of federally insured funds elevated the seriousness of their crimes beyond simple mortgage fraud to include violations that carried mandatory minimum sentences and potential decades in federal prison. The potential investors who had been considering supporting Tyler's restaurant venture were witnessing a comprehensive federal law enforcement operation that demonstrated how seriously the government treats crimes against homeowners and federally insured mortgage systems. "We have evidence that the defendants systematically defrauded a federally insured lending institution by forging signatures and creating false financial documents to obtain an $800,000 mortgage against property owned by their daughter and sister," Agent Williams announced to the assembled witnesses. The stolen funds were then used to purchase restaurant equipment that the defendants are now attempting to use as collateral for additional fraudulent business ventures. The explanation of the comprehensive criminal scheme provided clear education for the potential investors about the actual source of Tyler's business assets and the federal consequences that await people who commit mortgage fraud and real estate crimes. But the arrests were only the beginning of the federal action that would unfold during Tyler's business meeting. Other agents were simultaneously executing search warrants throughout the conference room and Tyler's personal assets, seizing evidence of the ongoing criminal enterprise and beginning the asset forfeiture process that would recover everything purchased with my stolen home equity. "We have federal warrants to search these premises and seize all assets purchased with proceeds from mortgage fraud," another agent announced to the confused potential investors. This investigation involves the systematic theft of over $800,000 from a homeowner through forged documents and identity theft. The search warrant execution revealed additional evidence of Tyler's ongoing criminal activity, including business plans that involved using restaurant equipment purchased with stolen mortgage funds as assets for securing additional fraudulent loans from unsuspecting investors and lenders. We're finding evidence that the defendant was planning to use restaurant equipment purchased with stolen mortgage funds as collateral for additional loans, Agent Williams announced as evidence was being collected. This appears to be ongoing criminal enterprise rather than isolated mortgage fraud involving family finances. The revelation that Tyler had been planning additional fraud, using proceeds from the original crimes against my property, added another dimension of criminal intent to the charges, while demonstrating the ongoing nature of the conspiracy that had made federal prosecution necessary. The potential investors who had been considering supporting Tyler's restaurant venture were learning that they had been targeted for participation in an ongoing criminal enterprise that used proceeds of mortgage fraud to create the appearance of legitimate business assets and entrepreneurial credibility. Anyone who invested money with Tyler Davis using restaurant equipment as collateral would have been participating in money laundering and fraudulent conversion of stolen property, Agent Williams explained to the assembled witnesses. Federal law requires that we protect potential victims from criminal schemes involving proceeds of real estate fraud. The educational message about the criminal nature of Tyler's business operations resonated with several potential investors who expressed gratitude for federal intervention that had prevented them from becoming victims of additional fraud schemes involving my stolen home equity. The arrest of my entire family during Tyler's business presentation provided perfect documentation of their ongoing criminal enterprise, while preventing additional fraud schemes that would have consumed more of my property value and potentially victimized other investors who were unaware of the criminal source of Tyler's business assets. But perhaps the most satisfying moment of the federal arrests came when Tyler's expensive restaurant equipment was seized as evidence and proceeds of criminal activity, finally ensuring that assets purchased with my stolen home equity would be available for restitution rather than supporting continued criminal ventures. All restaurant equipment purchased with mortgage fraud proceeds is being seized as evidence of criminal activity, Agent Williams announced, as federal agents began cataloging and removing Tyler's assets. These items will be sold through federal asset forfeiture procedures, with proceeds returned to the victim of the mortgage fraud scheme. Have you ever watched federal agents seize assets that criminals had purchased with money stolen from your property? That's exactly what I experienced as Tyler's restaurant equipment was removed from his business planning meeting and secured as evidence in the comprehensive prosecution that would restore justice to my stolen home equity. The potential investors who had been considering partnership with Tyler were now witnesses to federal law enforcement's commitment to prosecuting mortgage fraud and protecting homeowners from family members who commit real estate crimes while disguising their activity as legitimate business ventures. The comprehensive federal prosecution and civil recovery process that followed my family's dramatic arrest for mortgage fraud unfolded over the subsequent year with a thoroughness and precision that completely vindicated my decision to pursue legal action rather than accepting responsibility for debt created through criminal schemes against my property. The criminal trial of Robert, Linda, and Tyler Davis became a landmark case in federal mortgage fraud prosecution, attracting attention from law enforcement agencies, legal professionals, and homeowner advocacy organizations who were interested in strengthening protections against family members who commit real estate crimes while exploiting trust and emotional manipulation. Family members sentenced for $800,000 mortgage fraud against daughter's home was the headline that appeared in our local newspaper, along with detailed coverage of the mortgage fraud case and its implications for protecting homeowners from relatives who forge signatures and steal property equity for failed business ventures. The evidence against my family was so comprehensive and undeniable that their defense attorneys advised them to accept plea agreements rather than proceed to trial. But they refused to acknowledge the seriousness of their crimes until confronted with potential sentences of 25 to 30 years in federal prison. Tyler was convicted on all federal charges including mortgage fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and fraudulent conversion of stolen property. His recorded admissions that he knew the mortgage funding had been obtained without my consent, combined with his systematic use of stolen funds for personal expenses and failed business ventures, provided irrefutable evidence of criminal intent and ongoing fraud. The defendant's own statements demonstrate deliberate participation in systematic mortgage fraud and conspiracy to steal property equity from his sister. Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez explained during Tyler's sentencing hearing. His use of $800,000 in stolen funds to purchase restaurant equipment while the victim faced foreclosure represents the kind of callous financial crime that federal law is designed to punish severely. Tyler was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, complete forfeiture of all assets purchased with stolen mortgage funds, and mandatory restitution that would continue long after his eventual release from custody. His dreams of restaurant entrepreneurship were replaced by federal incarceration and permanent criminal record that would prevent future business ventures or professional licensing. Robert and Linda Davis were convicted of mortgage fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and identity theft, with their recorded statements defending the theft and their systematic collection of my personal information providing clear evidence of premeditated criminal activity rather than impulsive family financial decisions. The defendants conducted sophisticated financial intelligence gathering over several years to prepare for this fraud scheme, Judge Michael Chen explained during their sentencing hearing. They weren't concerned parents making poor financial decisions. They were systematic financial predators who planned and executed federal crimes against their daughters' property rights. My parents were each sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, complete forfeiture of their home and personal assets, and mandatory restitution that would affect them financially for the rest of their lives. Their comfortable suburban lifestyle was replaced by federal incarceration and permanent loss of the social standing they had enjoyed in their community. But the criminal convictions were only part of the comprehensive justice delivered through federal prosecution. The civil asset forfeiture and mortgage fraud recovery process ensured that the fraudulent loan was voided, and all proceeds were recovered through seizure and sale of assets purchased with my stolen home equity. The fraudulent mortgage has been declared void and removed from your property title, Attorney Michael Thompson informed me after the final legal proceedings were completed. Your house is restored to its original paid-off status, and you'll receive additional restitution of $347,000 to compensate for the financial and emotional damages caused by your family's crimes. The restoration of my home to its debt-free status was more meaningful than any financial compensation could have been, because it represented the vindication of 8 years of hard work and sacrifice that I had invested in achieving homeownership and financial independence. The seized restaurant equipment was sold through federal auction for $267,000, with proceeds applied to restitution, along with the sale of my parents' home and personal assets. The comprehensive asset forfeiture ensured that every dollar of my stolen home equity was recovered while preventing my family from benefiting financially from their criminal activity. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome of the federal prosecution was the complete restoration of my property rights and the legal precedent it established for protecting homeowners from family members who commit mortgage fraud while exploiting emotional relationships and trust. The Davis case has become an important precedent for prosecuting family mortgage fraud and protecting homeowner rights, explained Professor Sarah Williams from the law school's Real Estate Crimes Clinic. This prosecution demonstrates that family relationships don't provide immunity from federal prosecution when people commit serious crimes against property owners. The foundation that I established using recovered restitution funds provides legal assistance and advocacy services for homeowners whose family members have committed mortgage fraud or other real estate crimes, ensuring that other victims receive comprehensive legal support when relatives steal property equity for failed business ventures or personal enrichment. My own real estate career flourished in ways that validated every aspect of my legal battle to protect my home and property rights. The experience of navigating mortgage fraud recovery had provided expertise that made me a sought-after advocate for other homeowners facing similar crimes, while the financial security restored through comprehensive restitution allowed me to expand my business and provide pro bono services for fraud victims. Paige Davis has become a leading advocate for homeowner rights and mortgage fraud prevention, wrote the State Bar Association in a profile about my legal advocacy work. Her experience as a victim of family mortgage fraud has given her unique insights into the legal remedies available to property owners and the importance of aggressive prosecution for real estate crimes. 5 years after my family's conviction for mortgage fraud, I own my home free and clear while operating a successful real estate practice that specializes in helping other homeowners protect their properties from criminal schemes involving relatives who forge signatures and steal equity for failed ventures. Tyler remains in federal prison serving his 18-year sentence, with no possibility of early release due to the serious nature of his financial crimes and his lack of remorse for the systematic fraud that destroyed his sister's financial security. His restaurant entrepreneurship dreams have been replaced by federal incarceration and permanent criminal record. Robert and Linda Davis are serving their 12-year sentences at separate federal facilities, with their comfortable retirement plans replaced by prison terms and restitution obligations that will continue long after their eventual release. Their decision to steal their daughter's home equity for their son's failed restaurant has cost them both freedom and family relationships. But perhaps the most important legacy of their prosecution is the legal precedent it established for protecting homeowners from family mortgage fraud, and the recognition that property rights deserve comprehensive legal protection, regardless of the emotional relationships between victims and criminals. The house that my family tried to steal through mortgage fraud remains my home, restored to its original debt-free status while serving as a foundation for the real estate advocacy work that protects other homeowners from similar betrayal. Every client I help recover from mortgage fraud represents vindication of the legal system's commitment to protecting property rights from family members who exploit trust for criminal gain. My parents' theft of my financial security through sophisticated mortgage fraud ultimately strengthened both my commitment to homeowner advocacy and my understanding that property rights are fundamental to personal freedom and security. Their criminal scheme taught me that families who steal from each other destroy relationships as completely as they destroy financial stability. If you're a homeowner whose family members have committed mortgage fraud or other real estate crimes against your property, please know that comprehensive legal remedies exist to void fraudulent loans and recover stolen equity while holding criminals accountable for their actions. Federal law provides strong protections for property owners regardless of their relationships with the people who commit crimes against them. Document any suspicious mortgage or loan activity involving your property, consult with attorneys who specialize in mortgage fraud recovery, and don't hesitate to pursue federal prosecution when family members forge signatures or steal equity for failed business ventures. Your home represents security and independence that deserve protection from anyone who would steal them. Have you ever had family members mortgage your property without consent to fund failed ventures? How do you protect your home equity from relatives who might view your success as their opportunity? Your experience might help other homeowners facing similar betrayal and fraud. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Remember that homeownership represents financial independence and security, that criminals cannot be allowed to steal through fraud and forgery. Sometimes the greatest revenge against mortgage fraud is ensuring that stolen property rights are fully restored while criminals face comprehensive consequences for their betrayal of family trust. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.